Hey everybody, Professor Snart checking in. It's been a while. I was kind of under the weather, so I thought I'd skip the video check-in, but I'm back with not a new camera, but a new position for the camera, so it looks a little weird. I have a nice new big monitor because my little laptop monitor was just it's getting to be too much. So new configuration, although it maybe doesn't look too different. Sorry, something weird popping up here. Hopefully all is well with this recording. So I'm going to keep it relatively short in case something awful has happened. All right, so where we're at, due dates here. I'm recording this on Monday afternoon, which means we are past the William Wordsworth unit, which unfortunately I didn't get to do an announcement for, but that unit and the Coleridge unit, which is Unit 7 that we're into now, share a lot in common because they reflect my vast knowledge of cheesy heavy metal, for one, and also that pair of Wordsworth and Coleridge is not one that is just artificially brought together for us, but they really did work together as a writing partnership, particularly early in both of their careers, and most famously, I think, crafted a collection of poems called the Lyrical Ballads. They weren't all lyrics and they weren't all ballads, but go figure. But maybe more importantly, as part of that endeavor, as we had looked at, they wrote, or primarily Wordsworth wrote, the preface to a slightly later edition of that work that came out in 1802, in which he very consciously laid out this plan, sort of a manifesto, for a new style of poetry, which was very much an explicit statement of kind of the romantic ideal of this new poetry that was the language of men speaking to men, he said, which I think he meant humanity, but we don't want to forget the gendered language, which was so important and so reflective of that time period. But the sense that, poets and artists, but poets particularly, needed to address new topics that had been ignored in a way that was commonly accessible for the average reader, whereas previously poetry had been really reserved for the mighty or the epic or the kingly or the noble, the aristocratic kind of a thing. So in Wordsworth and Coleridge, we see this two very different poets, and their work is very different, but it has this sort of underlying thematic sameness, particularly early on, where they're really interested in producing a new theory of poetry, and then of course bringing that to life in the actual poetry that they're writing. My personal favorite, if you have to pick, is Coleridge, just because he's so kind of wacky, but he had a lot of personality defects, so he's one of those guys who's fascinating to study, but I'm not sure getting together for coffee would have been a real hoot. I think Wordsworth would have been the much better pick for that. A really great conversationalist, and Coleridge, God, you never knew what state he would show up in, or if he'd remember at all, so there you go. But we have a really fun unit, at least according to me, as far as Coleridge goes, because we get the chance to look at some of his most famous works, like Kubla Khan, which is a shorter poem that's really about the creative process itself. It's often written off as just a kind of hallucinogenic drug poem, but it absolutely wasn't that. That's not just an interpretive opinion of mine. It's kind of the objective facts of the production of that poem that we have now. But I'm also having you look at his other very famous work, The Rime of the Ancient Mariner, one of those works that many people, know of and have heard of, and maybe even know snippets of, but haven't actually read in the entirety. And one of the things in particular that we're looking at and thinking about is the existence of the little marginal footnotes, or marginal notes, not footnotes, that you'll see that accompany that poem, which were added by Coleridge himself at a slightly later date. Coleridge was this kind of inveterate reviser, and I'm not sure if it was this kind of obsessive compulsion on his part, or that, and maybe paired with the sense that he could never finish anything, or I honestly think that he realized that there was always something more to say, Not that you always could add things to the end of a work, and that in that sense it was never finished, but that there was always a way of kind of revising within a work to change what it was or to change how the parts related to each other. So the marginal notes that we have in that poem are really fascinating because it's like words or Coleridge as this compulsive reviser and re-seer of his own work, and a compulsive apologist as well. He's always sorry for the fact that his work is a fragment and that he couldn't quite finish what he started. The marginal notes are a really fascinating extension of his sense that the thing was never quite done. And what a great way of reopening a work that is theoretically finished from start to the end, without adding more lines to it. You sort of reopen the work to interpretation or extend its life by providing this commentary that is both sort of foolish and helpful at the same time. It says things that are already in the poem. It says things that are totally tangential. So think of that marginal voice as an editorial voice. It's very much a kind of character in the poem that Coleridge was careful to craft. So it's not like we're always supposed to believe that editorial voice or distrust the editorial voice. It becomes part of the very act of storytelling, which is the central theme of that of the poem itself. Okay, in addition to that, there's some really great illustrations to look at. The Mariner poem is such a great visual poem. It could be a great movie. So we have these very early illustrations that speak to how within a few decades of the poem's publication, it had gained notoriety and just was so kind of visually appealing to people that it invited this, many illustrators, but I think one of the most famous is the illustrations by Gustave Doré here that we have. And because of the nature of the illustrations themselves, the way that they were produced, they have this sort of haunting quality to them that fits so perfectly with the poem. Speaking of haunting qualities, if you can't get into the Rime of the Ancient Mariner, parts 1 and 2 by Iron Maiden, then I just don't know, man. I just don't know. Luckily, there's no actual requirement that you watch and or listen to these, but there really shouldn't be. I mean, just the sheer joy of the pants and the hair and the wicked guitars is like, what more do you need, really? Okay, so hopefully that gets us back, kind of caught up a little bit. Again, sorry I was out of action for a while, but I'm back into it. Hopefully the audio worked so I don't have to either re-record this or just apologize for the bad audio. But either way, there you have it. Okay, if you have any questions, be in touch with me, and I look forward to what everyone has to say about Coleridge and the Rime of the Ancient Mariner.